So as we spoke about this regarding a mimer, the order of the mimer is usually there's a question on a pasuk, or a number of questions. Then the mimer goes into explaining a certain subject, doesn't deal with the questions anymore. Then at the end of the mimer, after that subject is clarified, then the mimer goes back and explains the pasuk. So here, initially the mimer began with the pasuk, "V'ani nasatna lecha, shchem echad alachecha." Yaakov speaking to Yosef and telling him that he gave him an extra portion more than his brothers, and that he took this portion from Amori, being that there are 7 tribes. Oh, this from the book? Oh, the book. What? Oh, the last book.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. It's better. I'm teaching that again. Moshe's there. Moshe's in the house. Thank you. So, being that Eretz Yisrael had 7 nations, Kanani, Achiti, Amori, Prizi, and Vusi, Yaakov points out that this particular piece of land I took from Amori. And that was the question in the mimer. Number 1, why is he giving Yosef a portion more than the brothers? What is this portion? Why does he have to point out which tribe he took it from? All the other portions, we don't know which tribe it came from. So that begins to explain that. It starts as follows. Halichas Yaakov Lavan. The fact that Yaakov went to Lavan, U'avedas Habirurim. When you look at the story of Yaakov and Lavan, Yaakov went to Lavan. That's where he was supposed to find the shidduch, Leah and Rachel, and he got married, and he worked there, and the whole story with the sheep, spotted sheep, and sheep with lines and without lines, of this color and that color. What was going on? So, of course, every single detail has a lot of depth to it, but the general idea is that he went there the Var Berurim, which means, generally speaking, when we spoke about this already a few times, that the whole purpose of Avodah is to elevate the sparks. Where are the sparks? They're all over the world. But nevertheless, there's certain places in the world where these nitzutzis, these sparks are found. And by elevating the spark in this place, it has an effect on the entire creation. Where's the place? So these are things that we don't know. But Hashem leads us to those places. Which means when the Yidden spent time in Mitzrayim, because Hashem knew that Mitzrayim is the place where there are 202 sparks, that by elevating these 202 sparks has an effect on the whole universe and the whole creation. And then as Yidden traveled to different places, there was a time they were in Bavel, there was a time when they were in Eretz Yisrael. Wherever they were, it's because that's where the sparks were. The fact that Yaakov went to Lavan was because in that generation, that's where the sparks were. And Yaakov went there to elevate those sparks. So generally speaking, there were 2 people in that generation that they were connected in the most general way to all the sparks. One was Esau and one was Lavan. And this was Yaakov's Avodah to elevate Esau, and that's through all the interaction that he had with Esau. And to elevate Lavan, that's all the interaction that he has with Lavan. So he went to Lavan because that's the place where the Netzutzos were, and this was the Avodas HaBirurim, elevating the sparks. Shiva Beis Ifanim, elevating these Netzutzos, there are two Ifanim, two ways how to elevate the sparks. Hala b'derech Mechama, v'Beis b'derech Menucha. One is to elevate the sparks in a way of waging war, and one is a way of elevating the sparks through Menucha in a peaceful way. In fact, it's very much related to these days that we're in, because we know that both the Chag Hagula of the Mittel Rebbe and the Chag Hagula of the Alter Rebbe, as well as the Chag Hagula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, all connected to the pasuk Pada B'Shalom Nafshi. And the Maimarim, especially from the Mittel Rebbe, on that pasuk is all about what is Pada B'Shalom mean. Pada, Hashem, you redeem me. B'Shalom, in a peaceful way. It means that there's two ways to elevate the sparks. And one is B'derech Milchama, and one is in a peaceful, Menucha. Yeah, so what are the two ways? Habirurim B'derech Milchama, when you have to elevate the sparks in a way of war, in a gam k'shekeichi rav, even if you're very strong, and you have all the strength, his gaber ala seina, to overpower the enemy, and to be victorious, or even to defeat the enemy. This is something which is very sort of draining. You have to invest and exert yourself with tremendous kayach. Hashem is Gabriel saying until you're able to overpower, because the other person is also strong. And you have to fight until you bring the other person down. Like we just read about Yaakov and Esau's angel. They were wrestling with each other, and he did something to Yaakov, and then Yaakov was able to overcome him, and he couldn't leave. So that's when two people are fighting. That's called the elevating the sparks b'derech Milchama. Mashenkim b'derech Menucha, when you elevate the sparks in a peaceful way, that's Mashenim Atrida. It means that whatever is going on does not disturb the person. It doesn't bring it doesn't have to gather his strength together and exert tremendous effort because there's no war. And therefore, the sparks elevated in a more natural way. What does this mean? How can we explain this in a simple way? So in some places, it says this is the difference between Shabbos and the 6 days of the week. 6 days of the week, we're elevating sparks. And in essence, Shabbos, we're also elevating sparks. But the 6 days of the week, we have to deal with all sorts of things in the materialistic world. And generally speaking, it's baking and cooking and working in the field, going out and doing business, dealing with money and transactions and buying and selling. And all these areas, as we learned before, are areas which are challenging. And they create a challenge and have to overcome the challenge. So that's called Biru B'derech Milchama. Shabbos, I'm sitting in my house. I'm not dealing with the klipa. I'm not dealing so much with the opposition. I'm davening and I'm learning and I'm doing my avodah. And then naturally, this has an effect on the rest of the world. To give another example, what Milchama or Menucha means. By the way, Milchama doesn't necessarily mean war. It means that an effort has to be made in order to have an influence on changing the world around me. So to use as an example, when a teacher is teaching a student, he has to invest himself and he's engaged with the student, which means he has to evaluate and assess how much knowledge the student has, what he's able to relate to, what he can't relate to, what can I say to him, what would overwhelm him, would be too much. And slowly you teach the student and you raise them from one level to the next. So I'm very involved in the student's mind and the student's heart, in what the student accepts and what he understands. And that's how I am able to be mashpia on the student. What about the sun? The sun has an influence on the world. Does the sun engage in those places and things that it has an effect on? In other words, is the sun engaged with giving warmth to the world, with giving light to the world, with making things grow? No, the sun shines its light. And all the things that happen just happen by the way. When I light a candle, when I turn on the light, it doesn't invest itself, it doesn't engage with what's going on in the room. It's just shining light. But derech memela, naturally, automatically, we are all lit up. So in Chassidus, this is a very general subject, and it has ramifications in so many different areas. But in this mimer, is referring to the two ways as b'derech melchama and b'derech menucha. So melchama means there's some sort of a confrontation, and menucha means there is no confrontation. I'm just doing my thing, and naturally things are happening without engaging, without investing myself in the place of the opposition, the place that I have to elevate. I mean, when you talk about good and bad, we use different mashal. Sometimes we use the mashal of dirt or filth, that's bad, and cleanliness is good. So garbage and dirt and filth is a negative, and to have something's clean is cleaning up. We use that term a lot when we talk about self-refinement. Sometimes we use the term darkness and light. And here we see the same thing. This is also the difference. When you have to basically clean up a house, you don't bring in cleanliness. You have to take a mop, you have to take cleaning agents, and you have to scrub. And basically you're working with whatever is there that's not clean, and you're trying to scrub it off and take it off and remove it. And after removing this and removing that and using a vacuum cleaner and washing and scrubbing, eventually it gets clean. But what you're engaged with is whatever it is that's negative, I'm removing it. When it's dark in the room and I want it to be light, I don't deal with the darkness. I just bring in light, and b'derech mamela, the darkness is gone. So bringing light into a room versus darkness is b'derech menucha. Cleaning a house that's filthy and full of dirt and full of garbage, that would be like b'derech melchama. Right now we're in the parsha that talk about Yaakov. This is one of the big things in Chassidus, that Yaakov was different than Avram. Avram Avinu, Hashem changed his name. And once his name was changed, it's actually usher to call him Avram. We have to call him Abraham, because that's his new name. Yaakov is different. And by the way, the same with Sarah. She's not called Sarai, she has to be called Sarah. But Yaakov, even though his name was changed, nevertheless, it's not that this name became the new name and the old name is no longer valid. He has both names, Yaakov and Yisrael. So obviously, Yaakov and Yisrael are two levels, and they represent different scenarios. That when Yaakov is involved in one kind of avodah, is called Yaakov, and when it's a different kind of avodah, it's called Yisrael. And that's what we learned about in the previous Maimer, Matoivo Alecho Yaakov, Mishkanisecho Yisrael. That learning and davening, that's more Yisrael. And when you're engaging in the physical world, is Yaakov. So basically, this is the same thing. Like I said before, Shabbos and the 6 days of the week. And that's the name Yaakov in the way Yisrael. When a Yid is involved with Klippa and is confronted with that and has to overcome it, then we use the name Yaakov. When a Yid is just doing his avodah in a way that it just gets elevated, that's Yisrael. So another example of this is Torah and mitzvahs, or Torah and tefillah and davening. In davening, there's some sort of a confrontation here with my nefesh Bahamas. Mitzvahs, I'm working with something which is physical and have to elevate it. Learning, it says in Tanya, brought down from the Zohar, when a person learns Torah and he learns about food, whether it's kosher or not kosher, and he verifies the halacha, or he learns about people that do something wrong, and what's the halacha. All these things, when you're learning it, it's not just besides the fact that you're knowing the information and you know what you're supposed to do, you're actually elevating those klippos that are out there. For example, if you're learning about a simple halacha, two people are arguing. One person says, this belongs to me, and one person says, it belongs to me, you're lying. This one says, you're lying, and one of them is lying. So one of them is involved in lying, and one of them is involved in stealing. The other one is honest, and now we have to verify who's right and who's wrong. But in the meantime, what are we doing? We're learning about the person that's lying, what he's saying, how he's trying to lie. So we're dealing with something which is klipa. So Tanya explains that when you learn about it, it's elevating the klipa. But guess what? I'm not involved with the klipa. I'm not involved with this person or these actions. I'm learning about it. I'm sitting in a yeshiva and I'm sitting in front of a Gemara. I'm sitting in front of a Shulchan Aruch, and I'm in a spiritual world. And then naturally this gets elevated. That's Torah. And when you deal with mitzvahs or you deal with davening, you're actually dealing with the thing that's in the opposition, and I'm reaching out to it and elevating it. This is the difference between Yosef and his brothers. That's what he's going to explain now.
So by study Torah, we do before b'derech menucha.
What?
By we study Torah and
Torah is b'derech menucha, and mitzvahs is b'derech mochama, or davening is b'derech mochama. Another example is given with Shlomo HaMelech. It says that Shlomo HaMelech, in his times, all the nations of the world were under his rule. They were awed by him. They respected him. They came to him, gave him gifts. We don't find that in other places. So it says that he didn't have to go out there to have war. Like David HaMelech had wars with the nations around him. He won the wars. He eventually won the wars and he was victorious, but it came through war. To the extent that Hashem said, really, David HaMelech was supposed to build a Beis HaMikdash. But being that his hands are filled with blood from war, even though it was not chas v'shalom, anything wrong, he had to fight these wars. This was to protect the Yidden, but nevertheless, it's blood. And he can't build a Beis HaMikdash. That Shlomo HaMelech, the reason why it's called Shlomo, because in his generation was shalom, was peace. Everything was peaceful, which means that he was in Yerushalayim, and he had his palace, and the light of Hashem was shining through him throughout the whole world. And then naturally, the rest of the world came to him to receive from him. And the way it's going to be when Mashiach comes. Hashem is going to build a Beis HaMikdash through Mashiach on the third Beis HaMikdash on Har HaBayis. And v'naharu elav kol hagoyim, all the nations will come. What is the difference? One of the differences are that if for example, if you need light in that room, let's imagine there's no wall here. I need a light 20, 30, 40, 50 yards away. If I have a candle, the only way I'm going to get light there is take the candle and walk into that room and shine the light there, and then I'll have light. What if I have a huge, powerful beam in this room, and this beam shines, and the light of the beam goes to a mile? I don't have to go anywhere. I stay where I am, and it lights up very far away. So if it's a stronger light, I don't have to go there. The light shines there by itself. If it's not such a strong light, then I have to take the light and bring it there. So this is one of the reasons also explained that years ago, the Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael. They weren't in Golus, and it affected the whole world. That's because during that time, Beis HaMikdash, the light of Hashem was so powerful, they didn't have to go anywhere. The light of godliness that they brought down to Eretz Yisrael, the Beis HaMikdash, was able to shine to the whole world. But when we're in Golus, it's not good enough. We have to take our candles and go to Spain, to France, to Russia, to Poland, to Babylon, to Rome, all the different countries that we made our hakafas to. We went all over the place until we come back to Eretz Yisrael. So generally speaking, this is b'derech mochama, and this is called menucha. So what he's saying is the advantage of menucha is that even when a person has a mochama and he's victorious, but still there's fighting involved, and there's effort involved, and there's disturbance is involved. But menucha, there's nothing. I'm just involved with myself, with kedusha, with light, and everything else happens by itself. So this is the difference between Yosef and the brothers. And if you look at the line that's underlined, it says, generally speaking, that Yosef his neshama was connected to Atzilus, and the brothers, their neshama is connected to the lower world, Bria Tzirasiyah. So because Yosef had a higher light, he didn't have to engage in war. He didn't have to engage with the negative. He just shined his light, and automatically, the person was changed. But with the brothers, their neshamas was from a lower level, and therefore they had to do the avodah of elevating the sparks by engaging with the sparks. The last line on this page, page 8. This is the difference between avodah and the shvatim. Shem neshamas the biyah. Their neshama came from the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, which is lower. Yosef was a neshama of Atzilus. His neshama came from the world of Atzilus. The neshama is the biyah. Those neshamas that come from a lower world, because it's lower, they don't have that powerful beam. So avadasam b'derech milchama. Their avodah is in a way of waging war. There's a confrontation. The Yegiya, the Tirda Atzuma, there's a tremendous amount of effort involved. You have to exert a lot of energy to accomplish it. But the Neshamas the Atzilus, Avedasam B'derech Menucha. Their Aveda is in a peaceful way, which means that they don't have to get involved in any kind of confrontation. B'derech Oir Elyon, there's a higher light that shines, and when a very high, powerful light shines, then automatically the klipa disappears. So how does it connect to the whole mimer? Because really the mimer, what he explained was that that's the difference between davening and after davening. Davening is cherev shel shalom. When I'm davening, I'm not dealing with the confrontation out there in the world. So relatively, it's peaceful. When I go out there in the world, that's when it becomes a confrontation. And this is what Yaakov informed Yosef. Yosef in Neshama Datzilus, being that you're a neshama batzilus, so that means your neshama has an advantage over the neshamas of the shvatim, because they're neshamas of bria. So we know that a person has to know what their qualities are, even though Torah emphasizes so much humility. But humility does not mean that I should be in denial. I should not be in denial of the chesronos. I shouldn't be in denial of my weak points. And I also shouldn't be in denial of my talents and of my positive points. Because Hashem created me for a purpose, and I have to know what my talents are, what my potential is, and use that potential to its fullest the way Hashem wants. So Yosef had to be informed and told, you are a neshama from a different world, from Atzilus. So you have a higher neshama, and therefore your avodah is different than the avodah of the brothers. By the way, this also explains why there was such misunderstanding between Yosef and the brothers. I mean, this is a big subject in Chassidus, like what was going on? They were all tzaddikim, and yet they wanted to kill him, and so on. And the answer is that Yosef, the brothers were all one higher than the other, but more or less they were all in the same realm. Yosef was from a different realm completely, a much higher, more spiritual realm. And therefore, they didn't understand it. Like it says in Chumash, that Yosef recognized his brothers, but his brothers didn't recognize him. Literally, it's because he grew a beard. They haven't seen him for many years, so they didn't recognize him. But the explanation of Chassidus is that he was on such a high spiritual plane, they had no recognition in the level that he was at. It was beyond them. To give the example, one example is, why were all the brothers shepherds? Yaakov was a shepherd, Abraham was a shepherd, and Yitzchak was a shepherd, and David HaMelech was a shepherd, and Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd. Why do we find that all the tzaddikim, they were shepherds? One reason is given because they were meant to, in the future, become shepherds spiritually, shepherds of the Bnei Yisrael. There's another reason that's given, is because a shepherd is a kind of an occupation that's conducive to serve Hashem. You're outside of the city, you're in a quiet place, you and these peaceful sheep, and you're able to think about Hashem and meditate on Hashem and serve Him without disturbances. And that's why you find that so many tzaddikim were shepherds. Where was Yosef? Not only he wasn't a shepherd, he was in the city. Not only the city, he was in the lowest city in the world from a spiritual point of view. Mitzrayim was Eretz Aretz, which means the most immoral, the most unspiritual place in the entire world. And if he wasn't Mitzrayim and he was hiding in a basement somewhere, no, he's hiding. No, he wasn't in the basement. He was in the palace, which is the source of all the impurities of Mitzrayim. And in the palace, he was involved in everything going on. And at the same time, his level of connection to Hashem was no different than it was when he was in the house of Yaakov. And that's something that the brothers, they could not have any recognition at such a level. How was he able to do it? Because his neshama was from Atzilus. He had a neshama that had much greater spiritual capacity than their neshama. And therefore, his avodah is a different kind of avodah than the brothers. And that's what he said to him. He has a bigger portion in the avodah of elevating the sparks. So Shechem is the name of a city, but Shechem also means shoulders. Hakotev yamshachas echad. So basically, Kotev is the shoulders. One shoulder leads to the right hand, the other shoulder leads to the left hand. So it's basically the midas. And Aveda is to elevate the midas. And that's how a person becomes elevated in this world. So he told him that your Aveda is higher than the Aveda of the brothers, because their neshama is from Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah. Abahu alachecha. You are higher than your brothers. Remember, he asked the question, is he higher than the brothers in a way that it's immeasurably higher, or is just a little bit higher? It says alachecha, which seems to imply that his greatness was in proportion to the brothers. So he answers because avodah has to be in a certain order. First, the person has to do the avodah of elevating the sparks on the lower level. Then they can rise to the next level to do the avodah of elevating the sparks on a higher level. This is like during the week. First, we have 6 days of the week where we do the avodas haberurim on the lower level. We're dealing with gashmi's confrontation, and we have to elevate the sparks. And through that, we can rise to a place where we have Shabbos. That I don't deal with the gashmis, I don't deal with the sparks. I'm just doing my avodah of dominating and learning, and the sparks are elevated naturally, in a sense, by the way, without me investing any effort. It says that's why Shabbos, one of the malachas, is borer. Now that is select, because avodas haberurim on Shabbos is not through selecting; it's through davening and learning, and the results happen in themselves by themselves. I know that always at the end of the Maimer, the last few lines is always a little bit more complicated because it's very brief. You learn the whole Maimer, Ba'arichas, with all the explanations and elaborations, elaborates on it. And at the end, it gets very brief because there's a lot of, each line here is connected to a lot of background information. But the general gist of it is that the difference between the brothers and the Yosef is Aveda, which is through Menucha, and Aveda, which is through confrontation, through Milchama. One more thing. Why did he say that he took us from Amori? The Koyach Zeh, this power to be able to do this kind of high Aveda is Ma'ambir the Amori. This came from conquering Amori. And what is Amori? Again, Amori is the name of a nation, but there's something about the word itself. So Amori is Inyani Adibur Amutu. Amori means to speak. Vayomer. So it's a klippa related to speech. When in speech, there could be positive speech and negative speech. A person speaks words of Torah, words of davening, words of Abbas Yisrael, that's positive speech. When a person has speech which is just idle talk and waste of time, that's negative speech. It goes without saying that if a person is lying or a person is chas v'shalom speaking lashon hara, that's mamish naveira. So dibur tzrichem lahachliv dibur zeh b'dibur teira v'tfilah. We have to exchange that this speech, which before came from my animal soul, and it was a speech that had no meaning and no purpose, and was just wasting time, idle talk. Now I have to exchange that for words of Torah and words of davening. That is what he said by davening, and I conquered Ameri through davening and through learning. Ameri is speech of Klippa. How did I conquer the speech of Klippa? Through speech of Kedusha, which is davening and learning. Veich efsher, and how is that possible? Zer shapir shazal, ichachmasei tfilasei. Laidei chachmasei belimud maimorei hasogas alakim. By learning Hashem's wisdom and understanding godliness, Kedem atfilah before davening. Zeu chachmasei tfilasei. That's what Rashi is. His wisdom and his tefillah. His wisdom and his tefillah. And Daidei Chachmasa Belimud Mamara Sagas Alakim, Ze Mahapech Hadiba the Ameri, Shayesa Chazak. Ameri is the strongest of all the 7 nations. One word, but it's a very, very powerful thing. Ameri is the strongest of the 7 nations. That's what Mepharshim say. And that's why Yaakov told his sons, they told Yosef, you should know, I took it from Ameri, meaning to say this was the most powerful of all the nations, and I made that effort to fight with them to get it for you. Why is Ameri one of the most powerful? I would think it's not, it's just speech. So again, he doesn't say a word here, doesn't explain it here, but another Maimarim, it explains this Nekuda. And in fact, there's a whole chapter in Tanya that goes into this about the power of speech.
What?
Speech.
Okay.
Talking.
In general or talking? Tefillah?
Speech in general. Speech in general is the most powerful. How could that be? What does that mean is the most powerful? So we see from the fact, what are the 4 categories in the world? Daimim are things that have no life to it, right? Semeach is a plant kingdom, a little bit more life to it. Chai is the animal kingdom. What should have been the name of the 4th kingdom? Either human or seichel. What is it that distinguishes a human from vegetables, animals, and inanimate objects? Seichel. So the 4th category should have been chokhmah, seichel, something related to those words. Instead, what is it? Medaber? So that alone is already a hint that there's something about speech that is very powerful, even more than seichel. So like I said, there's in the 4th volume of Tanya, which is called the Igeres HaKodesh, is a letter that talks all about this inyan of the power of speech. And basically what the Alter Rebbe says there is that we see that even though speech is something which is less and more external compared to thought, what goes on in my mind is so much deeper. There's something internal. I'm thinking and I understand. When I speak, it's basically external. I'm sharing with someone else outside of myself some outline of what I feel, but you can never, in words, you can't really express what you're feeling inside. Not feeling and not intellect. Whatever comes out through speech is considered external compared to what I'm experiencing inside. And try to imagine a person, after the war, 25 years later, someone found their long lost son. And then the media comes and interviews him. So what do you say? How do you feel today? And the person says, amazing. There's no words. He can talk from today till tomorrow. What he's feeling inside is impossible to be understood, to be coming out in his words, because words are external compared to what's going on inside, what I'm thinking. That's the way it is with emotion, and that's the way it is with seichel. When I understand something in my head, even if I explain it to someone who knows less than me, and I use words and use the best way to explain it, but the person on a lower level can only understand the outline, the external part of it. Yet we find something amazing about speech, that when a person speaks, it gives them the ability to understand things deeper and better than when they thought. Which means that it's brought down in Tanya that we see when a person is thinking about a certain subject. And by the way, the people who can testify to this more than anything else are teachers. They're thinking about a certain subject, and they're even thinking about how can I explain it to my students. And they find that it's a little bit limited. I can't think of a white way to bring it out. As they're speaking, suddenly new ideas come to their head. So it says in Chassidus, when a person speaks, they suddenly get new depth, new width, new breadth in their understanding, like they didn't understand before. And same thing with emotion. It's brought down. So when a person gets emotional about something, and if the emotion is not a good emotion, like anger, one of the eitzes are, I'm not talking about psychology, I'm talking about Torah eitzah, is to be silent, not to speak for a little time, and allow it to calm down. Which means, and this is something which everybody probably can testify to, you're emotional about something, you're upset about something. As you talk about it, suddenly you're getting much more emotional than you were before. And you're wondering what happened. I didn't feel this way before, but as you're talking and you're telling somebody what happened, you're on fire. Because speech has the power to bring out more depth in emotion, more depth in seichel. And the reason for that is this is the main nekuda. It says in Tanya that the power of speech comes from a deeper place in the nefesh, deeper than emotion and deeper than the intellect. And therefore, when a person brings things out through speech, is able to draw more depth from emotion and from intellect. And that's why, even though speech seems to be something external, but it's something very powerful. Speech of Kedusha is very powerful, and speech which is Klippa is also very powerful. It can bring out very deep negative things in a person just speaking negatively. And that's what he's saying, that speech is the strongest of the seven nations, which means speech is stronger than emotion and all the different emotions a person has, because it reaches into the depth of the neshama that's deeper than the source of all emotion. And how do I counteract that? Which speech of Kedusha, saying the words of davening and saying the words of Torah, counteracts the speech of Klippa. Okay, we'll stop here. Yeah.
When it's talking about the avodah of Mechama or
Menucha.
we're not able to do the avodah Menucha.
We are, because
that's only in Shemus about Tzilas.
No, but Mechama and Menucha it's something which is relative. Like I said before, even us, the difference between my avodah Shabbos and during the week is Mechama and Menucha. And why is that? Because Shabbos is a bigger light. Not that I'm a bigger tzaddik, but on Shabbos I have more spiritual light, so I can do my avodah b'derech menucha. So it's relative. Generally speaking, out in the world, yes, tzaddikim, even among tzaddikim, there's some tzaddikim their avodah is more b'derech menucha. They do their thing and they don't get out there in the world. And some tzaddikim go out there and they deal with the confrontations.
Okay. Working on someone's midas, right? So is it possible to do that in the
Some
just
things,
by strengthening ourselves?
Some things like trap good with zayin good, the idea of let's say betochen, not to deal with the negative and not to.
Right.
That's an example of derech menucha.
Right. And that's possible for us.
Yeah.
And that's really, really
Yeah. When we talk about that, there's certain negative things in a person, and the way to overcome it is by not paying attention to, by ignoring it. That's what derech menucha. Some things I have to deal with and work it out. That's what derech menucha. Sorry. Saying sorry to Rabbi Chassidus. Baruch Hashem, I already have to check the stove.